Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we learn about the communist from Cherry who ran for president. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to share with us the political journey of Gus Hall, the Cherry communist who ran for president not once, not twice, but 4 times, I'm joined once again by reporter Jimmy Lovrien. Jimmy, welcome back.
Hello, Wyatt. It is good to be here.
So before we get into this, I'm just curious, what prompted you to look into this story? Because the timeliness is interesting given we're only a few weeks away from the election.
Right. So we had a reader email us as a suggestion for a Northlandia, and in it he mentioned Gus Hall. It was in response to the Jim Heffernan, a longtime columnist for us, had written kind of something in the wake of Kamala Harris picking Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, he wrote a column, and then in response to that, a reader said, hey, you should do a story, I think that would be interesting, and mentioned Gus Hall. And I had never heard of him, so I, copy paste his name, or I guess I didn't need to copy and paste. It's a pretty easy name to spell, but I Googled Gus Hall and was reading about it, and it's like, oh, he's from Cherry. Oh, he was the general secretary of the U.S. Communist Party, or Communist Party USA, and he ran for president 4 times. It was just like this bizarre biography, little snippets of his life, and it. Yeah, I had never heard of him, I don't think, at least that I can remember. Maybe it was mentioned in passing or something, but I was kind of fascinated by it and just thought it was it was odd. But I decided to dig into that for this month's Northlandia on my end. So that's how I came across it. And thankfully other people have, kind of done the heavy lifting in researching Gus Hall, so I was able to rely on them. But ultimately, Gus Hall was born Arvo Halberg in Cherry in 1910. He would go and change his name while he was organizing steel workers in Ohio in the 1930s, and then then he was Gus Hall after that. Became General Secretary of Communist Party USA in 1959. Until his death in 2000 at the age of 90. He was the son of Finnish immigrants whose father, he was already a communist, but then, he, throughout his life got more and more into it, obviously, into leading the party, even though the party was never really a major political force in the U.S. He had deep Soviet ties. And anyway, it was always just very interesting to come across all the weird stories about him that are out there. So that's kind of him in a nutshell. But yeah.
Now I know your actual article itself, besides the lead, doesn't go too much in depth about his unsuccessful presidential runs. But let's just talk a little bit about the timeline of when he ran for president, all 4 times, and how generally that went. Because this is, in case it wasn't obvious before, this is not current presidential election. This is not, besides the term presidential election, that has no relation to the current state of politics.
Exactly. So he ran 4 times as in 1972, 1976, 1980, and 1984. He never earned more than he never even earned a 0.1% of a vote. And his best showing was in 1976 when he earned fewer than 59,000 votes nationwide. So never a major political force, I suppose. I mean, never swayed an election, was never a spoiler or a third party candidate that had any real impact on a race. But he ran four different times and was never all that successful, except for 1976, which was kind of post Watergate. Some pretty harsh feelings among the voters of how things were going in the government, and so that I guess he was kind of able to capitalize off of, and yet still only raked in less than 59,000 votes. So,
but he got on the ballot nationwide.
Well, yeah, and I don't.
That's an accomplishment. I haven't done that.
Right, and I don't know how many states put him on versus didn't or whatever, but he was enough to be counted. So, yeah.
So when the time came to actually now look into the story now that you got the tip and you did some light research, how did you actually go about putting the story together? Who'd you talk to for it?
Yeah. So there's kind of two names that kind of came up pretty early that I knew I needed to talk to, who had actually, decent experience or decent, had spent a lot of time doing the heavy lifting on research. One was Aaron Brown. He's a Iron Range author and historian.
I feel like that name's been mentioned on this podcast a couple times for longtime listeners.
Exactly. He interviewed Gus Hall when he was a 19-year-old, when Aaron Brown was a 19-year-old journalist over summer break in 1999. It was about a year before Gus Hall died, and Brown was doing a series of stories on famous people from the Cherry area. Again, Cherry is a small town, a small area on the road to Hibbing there. If you're in between Hibbing and Highway 53, you'll go past Cherry School.
Home of the Cherry Tigers.
Yeah,
There's always that sign
exactly.
there.
And actually Gus Hall's, their family farm is across the street from that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you go by it all the time.
There you go.
And anyway, Aaron Brown said he had three famous people that he and a friend were writing about. It was Gus Hall from what he called jokingly the Cherry metropolitan area. It was Gus Hall. He said there was a baseball player who I don't know if he made it into the majors or not, but he was a good baseball player. And then apparently, and I didn't look this up, so I don't know who this is, but the person who computerized the arcade game Frogger.
Okay.
Maybe that's a future Northlandia, and beyond that, I didn't look any of this up. So those were the three famous people Aaron Brown wanted to interview. So he got on the phone and spoke with Gus Hall, who was 99, or about that. It was about a year before he died he would have been about 89-ish. It was about a year before he died at age 90. So anyway, he wrote a story and with his friend he was working on this series with. And anyway, he's looking back now, he's had a career as a journalist and as a writing instructor. And so he can look back and realize, what a 19-year-old reporter's shortcomings are. He's like, I didn't really critically consider the stories Gus Hall was telling him. He didn't really, question that or dig deep, maybe like he should have. And he jokes, he's like, yeah, and he kind of realized that when the weekly communist paper that I guess CP USA, the Communist Party USA, put out, asked to reprint the story, and then in a blurb, and then said like, thank you, for the greatest coverage we've ever Gus Hall's ever received, or something like that. And that's not really great when a source is that fawning that over coverage of themselves that much. So looking back, he said he would have. There's a lot of things he probably would have that he knows now that he would have pushed back on. For example, I mean, some of the stories were a little bit exaggerated probably, and I can get into that later. But also, Gus Hall was very, the whole proletariat workers class struggle thing is very important for communists, origin stories and the communist cause, I guess you could say. And he had a very poor childhood and working class and all that. But as general secretary of the Communist Party, he got a lot of money from the Soviet Union. And he lived a very, very comfortable life with his nice suits and working in Manhattan. Yeah, he would send Arabian horses to that farm for family members to raise, which, that's going to be a future story. So I'm not going to get into that. Stay tuned. But, so I spoke to Aaron Brown, very helpful for that. And then also he had mentioned Thomas Savonen, who is a reporter for the Finnish news agency in Helsinki, Finland, and he wrote his doctoral dissertation on Gus Hall. Spent 15 years researching Gus Hall. Came to Minnesota a few times for that. Met with family members. Went to archives. On either coast, there's things for him to have looked at, and so he spent a lot of time in writing his dissertation. And then last year came out with a book. So the dissertation, it's linked in my story. You can read it. It's in English. The book he wrote and just released last year is not. It's in Finnish. He's kind of shopping around, seeing if maybe a translator or a publishing house here might be able to translate it and release it. But the book, it is called, the English translation, so is Moscow's Man Entangled in Espionage. So anyway, he was very helpful. We met over video call after he had spent the day covering the capital there and politics over in Helsinki there. And anyway, he was just a wealth of knowledge. He explained kind of how he went about it, and some of the stuff that was crucial for his work was these documents that were released by the FBI that was basically like it was the years-long investigation into the Communist Party USA that he informants everywhere within that group, very close to Gus Hall, and we're reporting it back with stuff that, again, tons of details about those Arabian horses. Stay tuned. But he that played heavily into it, and then he also met with family members. One of which is actually Dennis Halberg, who played a huge role in the development of the port here in Duluth. That was his nephew. That was Gus Hall's nephew, and Dennis Halberg died late 2022. But he was close with Gus Hall. And anyway, he was alive still, and when Sovanen was working on this article, and so or working on his dissertation, excuse me, and so they met, and he was a wealth of knowledge as well. So just great to talk to them, both Brown and Sovanen, wealth of knowledge and very helpful in this, because Gus Hall's own biography, his own story he would tell people was not always reliable. So Sovanen especially really in his dissertation got to kind of a ton of fact checking on this origin story.
What Aaron Brown kind of wishes he had done at the time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and kind of, I think Aaron Brown, looking back, could see that he had, a 19-year-old reporter, can't blame him, right? And so I think, and then, over the course of, 15 years, that's he was obviously working, Sovanen was working as a reporter during that time and would take sabbaticals or get grants and have time to be able to do this. But just the ability to do that, I think, was really pretty impressive, because, Gus Hall liked to exaggerate his life. One example I point out in the story is, so at 15, he went and worked as a logger, as a lumberjack, right, near Cotton and Lake Vermilion here in Minnesota. And he, would say, that really, would make working as a logger would make a communist, or working in those camps would make a communist out of anyone, and it was so hard and so grueling and terrible conditions that really shaped him. His father was a communist and he was influenced that way, but that experience for a few years working as a lumberjack, I guess, really shaped him. Some of the stories he said to demonstrate that was that they would sleep two to a bunk in the camps, and one night his bunkmate died, and so because they were out at camp and they didn't have any place to put his body, they just left him there, and so he continued to sleep with the corpse for I don't know how many days is what he said. I guess he told Newsweek in the 80s. So is that to be believed? I
would say no.
Yeah,
I'm more going to go ahead and say my.
It sounds a little too out there. So that's pointed out in the dissertation.
You can at least move it somewhere else.
Yeah.
That dates back forever. The at least keep people away from possibly disease-ridden dead bodies.
Yep. And then
specifically that part of the story. Maybe the other part's true where he died, but the laying next to him in bed, that's already like, okay, I don't know if I believe that part.
Right. And so then the other one was that he would always talk about the maggots and the beef that they would eat in these camps. And Sovanen wrote that really resembled a scene in a classic Soviet film about a battleship where the crew is having to eat beef, maggot-infested beef. And so, was it true? Sure looked like a scene out of a movie all of his comrades would have probably enjoyed. So, yeah, And then he uses kind of other examples from, other lumber camps at the time to that were these conditions, did other people have shared these experiences in the region, during the 1920s, and sounded like tough work, but maybe not necessarily the way Hall wrote it or, would talk about it. And again, the origin story of being a proletariat, working class person who's, got that life experience was very important for communists. And he sounds like Hall really kind of milked that and maybe exaggerated beyond that. But
Well, I mean, even non-communist
yeah,
political candidates will do that. They'll like
Exactly.
milk their, I'm not going to name names here, but they'll milk their humble origins
Right.
and like, I'm the working class, I grew up poor and blah, blah, blah,
Yes.
as much as they can.
Right.
And that's like everybody across the political
Exactly.
spectrum. So that's not surprising that a communist also made that claim.
Yep.
Maybe even more so.
Right. But again, and then later in life, he liked the finer things. And Savanen said he had a chauffeur. He would always stay he preferred to stay in four-star, five-star hotels. He would fly first class. He would
Oh yes, the working man.
exactly, yeah. And then he would he would stay in those nice hotels instead of what was kind of common practice among, I guess, the Communist Party, I guess, was to stay at the home of your comrade. If you're traveling somewhere, you'd stay with another communist, I guess, is kind of the idea. But he wouldn't do that. He wanted to stay someplace else. But
Well, it's because he lay next to a dead person at one
right,
point, and
right.
so that's kind of scarred him forever from being able to be shared space with anybody.
Exactly.
Obviously.
So, yeah. And again, he was getting, documented in the FBI files that are now public, millions from the Soviet Union to the Communist Party USA and for party business, but obviously not just that. So he was doing fine. And all along, again, never really grew. He was the helm of that for 41 years. He was millions in from the Soviet Union and still couldn't really grow he was viewed pretty ineffective by the Soviet Union through all that. But still
You gotta say it with the Russian accent, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Ineffective.
and still remain, kind of liked that whole Soviet idea even after it fell in 1991. So, but yeah, his connection to the Soviet Union specifically kind of began in the early 30s when he went to Moscow and to attend the Lenin School there, right? And he came back very pro-Soviet Union, describing it as the most wonderful place on earth. And as Savanen says, that was the way he described it, but that was not the reality. That was, the 30s were among, obviously the Soviet Union was a dictatorship. Stalin, not good.
You don't
That
say.
was, yeah, exactly. The
Look
30s.
Look it up.
Right. The 30s were some of the worst years of Stalin's dictatorship. And yet, to Hall, it was utopia, or the way he described it was utopia. So, yeah. And then upon his, so that's kind of his communist legacy, I guess. His involvement is, that's how people remember him as a kind of a perennial presidential candidate, kind of a little bit of a joke. Never super serious, but one thing that is interesting is he actually played a pretty big role in the 30s in organizing unions, specifically the steelworkers, right? So he comes back from the Lenin School, is present in Minneapolis for the big Teamsters strike, which at least one of his fellow organizers said he was, in the street fighting. That was a big part of this strike. Teamsters strike was there were brawls in the street. Apparently, he maybe was part of that, and then he moved to Ohio, got a job. That's where he changed his name to Gus Hall. Got a job in a steel mill with the intent of organizing its workers, and then became a leader in the 1937 Little Steel Strike, which there are thousands of steel workers walking off the job, and ultimately 17 strikers or strike supporters died, 10 of which were killed by Chicago police in what's called the Memorial Day Massacre. Anyway, that resulted in he was organizing on behalf of a union that became the United Steelworkers, which again represents every operating taconite mine in Minnesota right now, and also many steel mills throughout the country, and also, other sectors too. Essentia's, was it their lab attendants, or they don't just represent people in steel.
Right.
Yeah, but they're a huge major union, and he played a pretty big role in that. He would often, that again became central to his life story. The United Steelworkers really wanted to distance themselves from him, especially later, as he was, the Communist Party leader throughout the second half of the 20th century, and the United Steelworkers were like, oh, chill. So one thing that Aaron Brown said is, he described him as a mixed bag of historical value because, quote, you can take and say he was ineffective and too wedded to the Soviets later in life, but in his young organizing days, he played a very crucial role in building industrial unions in the United States. So, yeah, kind of a mix there, and an interesting life. Ultimately, kind of beginning in Cherry, but he was always connected to Cherry. He was always connected to his nephew, Dennis Halberg. He was sending back horses for family members to raise, Arabian horses, again, future story, to raise at their Cherry farm, which was across the street of what is now Cherry School, and then right next to the Masaba Co-op Park, which was like a communist park, and now it's kind of it's like a progressive gathering spot park, but had roots as a communist park that his parents almost certainly, maybe even him, helped build and establish. So anyway, just to me, it was fascinating to find out that there was this character from the Iron Range that I had not heard about, and just kind of weird in a lot of ways.
And as always, Jimmy, why do you think this fits into Northlandia? Obviously, the conversation of communism and its historical global impacts are not specific just to the Northland, but why does Gus Hall's story kind of fit into that realm?
Yeah, I think it's the
besides the Arabian horses, we'll come back to that.
Yeah, yeah, it's just the weirdness of it, of that someone from Cherry. I don't know. There's just that this figure came from Cherry and that ran for president 4 times. I don't know. There's just a weirdness to it. There's kind of a perennial candidate. It's always kind of
came from our weird Northland, part of our weird Northland history.
Always become kind of I think are interesting in their own regard. The fact that there was a general secretary of the Communist Party USA, which I didn't really realize was a thing before this, but the fact
more you know.
Yeah, he held that. He took in lots of Soviet money, yet the people closest to him in that organization were feeding information to the FBI about him. So, yeah, just an odd character, I think, and one that I understand why maybe people are not as proud or as forthcoming with saying he's
eager to brag about.
Exactly. I don't think there are as many people eager to brag about him as maybe there would have been had he not, had he stuck with his role, in the little steel strike and those types of things. Maybe so. But I think his role with the Communist Party and connections to the Soviet Union and his loyalty to them, I think maybe it's not a legacy. I think the region is super excited to share. Interesting. It's not like people are hiding from it, but I don't know if I'd ever see his name on a billboard that he was home. Cherry was the birthplace of Gus Hall or something.
Maybe on an attack ad.
Yeah, right.
I had to look back, but I think it's safe to say that this might be the most controversial figure we've had on Northlandia, at least politically.
Probably. Yeah.
Be funny, if we do an end of year look back on Northlandia we did last time. If we have an unofficial election for mayor, there's a communist figure that could be in the running.
Oh, the mayor of Northlandia.
Mayor of Northlandia. Yeah.
Exactly.
We got the Communist Party represented in that now.
Right.
I didn't think that would happen. All right, Jimmy. Well, thanks so much for bringing it here. And curious to see, is that going to be your next Northlandia then?
It might be a vault story, actually.
Oh, vault story. Okay.
There's crime and investigation, but it could probably be, it's one of those things that could be a Northlandia, it could be a vault. We'll see. So either way, Maybe if it is a vault, we can still do a podcast if you want.
That's true. Or at the very least, we'll mention it so listeners, where to find the article if it's not already featured in Northlandia. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But again, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column and see photos, visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/topics/Northlandia. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to the Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path of no extra turn, here in Northlandia.